So when we talked about leadership challenges, if you can't tell by the picture, I'm clearly one of the best people here to talk about a leadership challenge. So I joined the Navy when I was 18, right out of high school. 6 months later, I was in BUDS. And Leif was my OIC in BUDS. And I think even then, I was one of his greatest leadership challenges. It was the first time we worked together, but not the last. And I remember one time when we were in BUDS, we were in second phase. We were getting ready for diving. And I was one of the younger guys in class, and our job was to charge bottles for the life jackets, which meant we had to fill these bottles to put in our life jacket, because if anything went wrong on a dive, you'd crack the bottle and take you to the surface. So how we did this is we'd have to get there early, we'd get our dive rigs ready, we'd put them there, and I remember getting my life jacket off, it has my name on it, and I put it on my rig, and then I go and I charge life jackets for everybody else. The entire class shows up, they start getting ready, and this particular morning, when Leif got there, he was the OIC of the class, so not only does he have to get ready, he has to make sure that the instructor staff know the class is ready so we can all go and do the dive. And so he popped his head in and he said, "Hey, has anybody seen my life jacket?" And I remember I grabbed mine, again, my name was on it, so I grabbed mine, so I knew I didn't have his. And so I said, "No, I haven't seen it." He said, "All right, thanks." And I hear him outside walking around talking to people. "Hey, have you seen my life jacket?" And about 5 to 10 minutes later, he comes back in and he was like, "Hey, would you guys mind just checking your life jackets? Make sure you don't have mine. We're on a time crunch. We don't want to be late." And a couple of guys went, and they went and checked, and I kept charging bottles. And maybe 3 to 5 minutes later, I hear, "Matt!" And it was then I knew I made a mistake. And so I walk out of the building, and Leif is standing by my dive rig, holding a life jacket. And at this time, I'm in E2. You don't know how low that is in the military? It starts at E1. Leif is a lieutenant. So I walk up to Leif, and I've known Leif for over 20 years. He's not quick to anger. But to this day, and that was 18, I'm 41, to this day, I remember his face. It was red. And I walk up and I'm like, "What's up, LT?" And then he proceeded to kind of lay into me, chew me out. So I take this chew out, like, "You're right, it finishes, thank God." And so I apologize, I'm like, "Sir, it won't happen again," and Leif leaves. And this part I remember most because he came back. Because it wasn't over yet. He was so mad he didn't get all the anger out the first time. So he comes back and he keeps going. So I take this and it finally ends and I'm like, "Oh, thank God." And I never did this again. It also wasn't the last time I was a leadership challenge. So fast forward a little bit. I show up to SEAL Team 3 shortly after my 20th birthday. And I immediately get into a platoon. I start a workup. And one of our training, the training that we do, is in land warfare. And let me also give some context to this. This was also early days of the war, so I'm 20, 21 years old, and I'm a Navy SEAL. Now, I assume most of you have heard what a Navy SEAL is before you showed up today. So you can imagine what that did to my 20-year-old ego. So now I'm this big, strong Navy SEAL, new guy, pretty good at my job for a new guy. And we're starting this workup, and we're in land warfare, and I know Jason talked about land warfare, but one of the things we did in land warfare is something called IADS. It's immediate action drills. And so what we do is we essentially load up on all the ammo that we can carry. We walk out in the desert, and targets pop up, and we shoot at them. And we move over here, and we patrol more and shoot at them, break contact, and we basically do that until we're out of ammo. So when you're a new guy in a SEAL platoon, you're generally carrying one of two things: a radio or a heavy machine gun. I didn't want to carry the radio, so I was carrying a heavy machine gun. And one of the things the instructor staff do to new guys is they put pressure on them. Their goal is to stress them out so we understand how to react in stressful situations. So during this particular IAD, I'm running, I'm shooting, it's 100 degrees out, I've got all this weight on, I'm shooting, I'm just trying to do my job, and I have this instructor just on top of me, just chirping at me, harassing me, telling me I'm doing things wrong, and just putting all this stress on me. And so I remember I finally got behind a berm, I took a knee, my gun was out of ammo, I had 100 rounds left. I had to put it in the gun, and this instructor is just going. And so I pulled the ammo out, and then I threw it into the desert. And I knew two things were gonna happen. Me and that instructor were gonna fight, or he was gonna stop yelling at me. And I didn't know, it was his choice. So he kind of looked at me with this confused look. He didn't say anything. He walks out into the desert, picks up the ammo, walks up, gives it to me. I put it in my gun, I carry on with the IAD. So the day ends, we go to debrief, we get to the classroom. I sit down, we have the debrief. Nothing was said, I made it. And so as I'm standing up from the desk, I hear my boss say, "Hey Matt, come here a minute." And it was also then I knew there was a problem. So I walk up to my boss and I say, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, "I want to talk about you throwing your ammo out in the desert." And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Why did you do that?" And I'm explaining, I'm blaming it all on the instructor. And he said, "I know, but why did you do that?" And I'm like, "I just told you, it's his fault." And he said, "You did it because you got emotional. And when you're emotional, are you making good decisions?" And I knew the answer to this. I said, "No." And he said, "What caused you to get emotional?" And I was like, "That guy, I told you that 2 minutes ago." And he said, "It was your ego. Your ego caused you to get emotional." And he said, "Do we make good decisions when we're emotional?" I said, "Of course not." And he said, "That's why you need to stay detached, because when we're detached, we can look at the problem objectively. When you're emotional, you're in the moment, and you're not going to see the bigger picture." And I appreciated that I had this leader who was willing to take a young leadership challenge like myself and lead me the way I need to be led. And again, wasn't the last time I was a leadership challenge. If you remember what Jocko and Leif talked about earlier about the patches, the offensive ones, I was the ringleader of the group that made the offensive patches. I thought it was hilarious. But again, we're talking about leaders that lead people the way they're supposed to be led. So let's forward a bunch of years, and I became a team leader of a platoon of my own SEALs. And I had my own leadership challenges. And one challenge that I had was my number 2. Now, in a SEAL platoon, when you're talking about leaders, it's called a leadership pair. There's a 1 and there's a 2. And how they pick a 1 and 2 is they give one that's a little bit stronger and one that's a little bit weaker. And the goal is that they average each other out. Because if you have a platoon with 2 strong leaders, you're going to inevitably have a platoon with 2 weak leaders. And that's going to be off. So I was a little bit stronger than my number 2. But I knew who he was. He was a little bit older. He was more mature. And so I thought, hey, this is going to be no factor. I'm pretty good at what I do, so I can perform for me and I can perform for him. And on our training trip, during our workup, I remember as we were going through SAUC, which is an urban combat, we were getting ready to go to the target, and I rolled up and I needed to get my number 2. His name was Ben, and I said, "Hey Ben, this is Matt." "Hey Ben, this is Matt." "Ben." Nothing. Well, in this platoon, I had an individual that I had cultivated over a couple of platoons with me. His name was Tyler. I said, "Tyler, Matt, go ahead, what?" I said, "I need you to take your squad, I need you to go around the west, hit the building." He said, "Roger, done." And I could tell that even though we were successful and we got back, the debrief was good, my number 2 was really bothered by this because I didn't lean on him. And so, fast forward another trip, this happens again, and I find myself in Jason Gardner's office. He was one of my bosses. And I was telling him everything that was going wrong and how Ben wasn't where he needed to be and what he needed to do and what I thought we should do about it. And he sat there and he didn't say anything. He listened to me for a while. He looked at me and he said, "Matt, if Ben's not up to the level he needs to be at, it means you're failing as a leader." And I remember thinking that is absolutely preposterous. Because that's not my fault. I'm good to go. That's his fault. Everybody else is good. Why can't Ben be good? And so I keep protesting, and simply Jason says more or less the same thing to me again. So we have some more conversation. Eventually I go back to my office and I sit at my desk. And I remember this. I remember staring at the wall, and I remember thinking about what Jason said, and I remember thinking, he is absolutely wrong. There is no way he's right. I'm right. Jason's wrong. And then I relaxed, and I checked my ego. I controlled my emotions. I remember what that first team leader said to me is we don't make good decisions when we're emotional, and clearly I was being emotional. And ultimately what I decided was Jason was absolutely right. Ben was my responsibility. Remember, he's my number 2, which means he's under me. And if he's not where he needs to be, and as painful as this was, I was failing as a leader because I wasn't leading Ben the way he needed to be led. And so what I had to do was I had to step back, reassess my relationship with Ben. We had a relationship, but I needed to make it stronger because I needed to be able to influence Ben. I needed Ben to be able to trust me so I could communicate with him, so I could bring him up to the level that he needed to be. And I would love to tell you, in that moment, I figured it out. Ben and I had a symbiotic relationship, but it was 2 of the most trying years of my career because it was something I wasn't used to, and I had to lead a different way than I'd led before. But I want to emphasize something, is we had a successful platoon. We had a successful deployment. And Ben got to the level he needed to be. And why that was so critical was because on that deployment, I actually had to split my platoon up, and Ben had to lead one of my elements. And if Jason had not said that to me, and I had not taught and trained Ben the way he needed to be trained, he wouldn't have been ready to take one of my squads and to be out in the world alone and unafraid. And so when we're talking about leadership challenges, the first thing we have to do is we have to check our ego. We have to build a strong relationship, because without a relationship, we're not going to be able to influence people. We have to communicate in a way that they can understand. I was the tactician, Ben was a little weaker, so I had to communicate in a way that I could raise him up, get him to my level, because Ben was going to be at my level next. And he did. He made it. He became a team leader, and he had a successful deployment as well. So we need to stay aligned. We need to create a culture of leadership and ownership. And it was not only in the SEAL teams that I used these skills. After I retired, I became a management consultant. I had bosses that micromanaged. I had analysts that were leadership challenges, and I used these skills even in that environment because they're universal. And so if you take anything away, what I want you to remember is there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. And with that, I thank you so much.